Hey everybody, Dr. Diane, your chronic illness expert here, talking today about hidden reasons for shortness of breath. Now, we're going to cover some of the basics because it's important to make sure everybody's ruled out the basics. That usually if you're online searching for this, a lot of people have seen their doctor and they have tried the basics and they still have shortness of breath and they're trying to figure out why. So let me go through the basics and then we'll get into the part around what to do if the basics are not fixing it, or if the basics have shown to be normal. So some of the basic things we want to make sure to rule in or rule out are the obvious things like pneumonia, doing things like chest x-rays, looking at the lungs to see if there's anything that's a symbol of pneumonia in there. We always want to look for things like asthma and emphysema, these kind of obstructive types of respiratory diseases. We also want to consider basic blood tests for things like iron. Now, there are tests such as the standard CBC, the one that looks at your red blood cell count, and things like hemoglobin and hematocrit. So those standard tests can sometimes give insight into red blood cell health and iron health, but it's definitely nowhere like getting an iron run as well as what's called a UIBC, which is talking about the saturation of your the red blood cells largely. So with all of that, if you've done all of those basics, also thinking about other things that can influence the red blood cells like B12 and B6, if you've done all that, if you've done your pulmonary function test and you're like, what is going on? This is where two of the top things I would be considering are Babesia, which is a chronic hidden parasite, and mold. One of the things that mold does is lower something called vasoendothelial growth factor. This is a protein that causes our body to grow new blood vessels. When we have a lowering of the signaling of vasoendothelial growth factors, guess what? We don't grow those new blood vessels as easily. And when we don't grow those new blood vessels as easily, our cells don't have the same blood supply. They can become deficient in blood, and that can lead to a subsequent air hunger. We do really want to think about histamine overload, and a lot of people think about allergies for this, but histamine overload is not just from environmental allergies. So if you don't know what histamine is, you've probably heard of an antihistamine, something like Benadryl, Claritin. These types of medications lower the histamine in our body. Histamine is a molecule that is semi-inflammatory that gets produced when it gets produced in a lot of ways, and allergies are one of them. Now, we can have histamine overload lead to something like shortness of breath. So you want to rule out allergies such as environmental allergies or food allergies, but also when we have a lot of toxins in our body or we have chronic infections in our body, the body tends to break down the histamine releasing cells at higher amounts, and we actually can have this almost internal production and this internal release of histamine. So it's coming more internally rather than externally. So sometimes if you're like, you do all those standard histamine tests, your allergy tests, and it's like, well, I'm not really allergic to much, but you have these histamine related symptoms, shortness of breath being one of them, it could be due to those imbalances in your body that I'm discussing in this video, leading to that histamine intolerance. This is also where we get into other diseases such as mast cell activation syndrome that I talked about on this channel. So please do look in the show notes about how to work with my clinic in order to get some of these additional tests, to look for hidden toxins that can cause this inflammatory reaction, to look at things like Babesia and mold illness. We do all of that in our clinic and more. Thank you for subscribing. Ciao for now.